Good morning, everyone. I am Sjoert Holtackers, and I work for the Flemish Institute for Primary Care, called VIVAL. And I've been asked to give you all a brief update on the implementation of the maturity assessment in Flanders. Now, to be clear, Flanders is a region in Belgium, and in 2019, the Flemish government decided to divide Flanders and Brussels into 60 primary care schools. Now, each zone has to work together with different stakeholders in order to promote and implement the concept of integrated care. And for this concept, we use the definition of the World Health Organization and also our quintuple A model. Now, it's based on the quadruple A model, but in the VIVAL we've added a fifth dimension, namely that of the pillar that focuses on social justice and inclusion. After all, it is important to adapt actions and strategies to specific target groups. It's also called proportional universalism. To achieve the same effect with different target groups with the same actions, we have to use different strategies. Now, as for the implementation of the maturity assessment, we first started with a retranslation of the original tool. We translated it to Dutch, but we also worked together with the Flemish Agency for Care and Health and the University of Ghent to adapt it to our local context. Afterwards, we piloted the assessment in 4 primary care zones, region Aalst, Bruges, East Maasland and West Maasland. And we've also organized the maturity assessment with the different stakeholders of VIVAL. In total, there were 43 persons that filled in the online assessment, and it was a diverse group of people. We're policy workers, CEOs, public servants, physicians, psychologists, but also informal caregivers and so forth. Now, as you can see, most of the assessments are quite on the conservative side, with the largest mean score of 2 on the scales. That being said, the scores in itself don't mean anything without the discussions we've had during the consensus workshop. And these discussions, they kind of showed the strengths and weaknesses of the tool. For me, it was very nice to see and to facilitate these consensus workshops together with Sol from the Flemish Agency for Care and Health, because we kind of felt like some gold diggers sifting through the various comments and stories in search of golden nuggets of good practices and small innovations. These discussions were also really worth the time and investment because it also gave a platform to more of the quiet voices and to people who are normally not heard or involved in different processes of strategic planning. For example, I think the quote of one of these informal caregivers summarizes it nicely, that it was quite democratic and it was quite, how do you call it, endearing that he had a voice, that he could say what he wanted, that he was on an equal level together with the professionals and everything. Though collaborating with people and doing the consensus workshop also laid bare some issues of trust and basic human cognitive reflexes. We've learned that trust is key and can be indicative of certain scores. For example, in the previous slide, you saw a more favorable score in the region of Bruges. That was because they had a strong history of collaboration, and they also had a key figure there that earned a lot of trust from the stakeholders. And that kind of gave most of the participants the idea that there was a better way of integrated care in that region, as opposed to other regions where they were just starting to get to know each other and were looking how to cooperate and trust each other. Now, another thing we saw is what psychologists might call the attribution bias. We noticed that higher scores were normally attributed to local collaborations or projects, whilst lower scores were, like for example in digital infrastructure, were attributed to the Flemish or Belgian government not doing their jobs properly. So it's a normal reflex, but on the other hand, we do not totally agree with these ways of thinking, and we have to push the people and challenge them to look for local good initiatives. Now, as for the future, our initial experience with Europe was very positive, and we would like to broaden the implementation of the maturity assessment in all 60 primary care zones in Flanders and Brussels. Now, how we see this and what is needed to achieve that is something I'll go into when I give my second presentation later today.